Singaporeans in London are among the first to cast their ballots in this election, but many among the 6,570 registered overseas voters will have to give the polls a miss this time because of COVID-19. Now, in a moment, we'll check in on voting in London and Washington, but first, this report from Isabel Lim and Gwyneth Teo.
Many countries have closed their borders to international travel. Other countries such as China and Australia even have domestic travel restrictions. All these hinder access to the nearest polling station for those who don't live in the 10 cities of the facility, the same 10 as in 2015. Even without those impediments, there are risks.
For some countries like the USA, the polling stations are in San Francisco, New York, and Washington. And for a lot of people, their nearest polling station is, for example, New York, which is like the epicenter of COVID. So for them, it would be a public health risk. And a lot of people have said as much, like, my nearest polling station is New York, but I don't think I want to travel.
Ms. Toh has organized a Facebook group of overseas voters to petition various agencies such as the Foreign Affairs Ministry and the Elections Department. More than 320 of them have signed the letter. She lives in Thailand, which has no polling station, as Southeast Asian nations are considered near enough for Singaporeans to return home to vote. But logistical difficulties remain.
One woman who's in Malaysia, I think, messaged me or commented that in order to vote, because the border is closed, she would have to walk across the causeway with her child and her luggage, vote, and then she would have to be quarantined with her young child for 14 days.
Philip Han, who has been based in Taiwan since March, had already bought a ticket to return to Singapore on 9th July. He would have been able to vote at a special polling station at his stay-home notice residence. However, the airline cancelled his flight in late June. The next availability is in August.
They said that it was due to the pandemic, and I think it was a capacity issue. I mean, when I looked on the flow chart, the seating chart, I was literally the only one on the plane. So I think they didn't want to fly.
The group has also suggested mail-in voting or voting by proxy. In response to media queries, the Elections Department reiterated that these suggestions pose challenges in keeping voter secrecy and preventing voter fraud. It added that it had released overseas voting information earlier than usual this year to give voters more time to make arrangements. For overseas voters, it's about their democratic right to vote.
It's a very important process that comes around every 5 years. And a lot of us feel very, we want to be part of it. I think it's good to be part of that journey, that decision-making, whatever that may be, and to exercise our vote to a right to a vote.
In 2015, there were some 4,800 registered overseas voters. 70% eventually cast their ballot.
Voting at the Singapore High Commission in London has been underway for 7 hours. Ollie Barrett is there. And Ollie, 7 hours. How has voting proceeded so far?
It seems to have gone very smoothly indeed. There's been a steady stream of voters all day. There were perhaps more right at the start of the day than we've seen since then, but I think officials do expect that later in the day we'll also see a bit of a surge again as the workplaces and people who are studying finish their days and come here afterwards. As I say, a steady stream of voters in and coming out of the High Commission with all of the safety restrictions that are in place. And the Singaporeans that I've been speaking to have been saying that it's really important to them to come out and to participate in the election overseas. And it's a connection they feel that makes them feel connected to home at a time when the country is preparing to vote in the general election.
Ollie, tell us something about those safety measures that have been put in place with regards to COVID-19.
Yeah, pretty extensive and very clearly marked out as soon as you arrive at the High Commission here in London. The street is marked out to make sure that voters are distancing from each other, but also from the neighbourhood, so that the pavements are clear for people to walk past the High Commission if they're on their way about their business. And everyone has to wear face coverings to go inside the High Commission and cast their ballot. There's hand sanitizer inside Two, the numbers inside the building at one time are limited. All of the staff will be wearing face coverings inside and outside. So the temperature screenings added on top of that mean that it amounts to a pretty rigorous operation with regards to safety here. Certainly there are British regulations and rules that the High Commission has to follow, but the High Commission is going above and beyond those regulations.
It's important to keep everyone safe. Ollie, thank you very much for that update on Singaporeans voting there, getting their ballots in early for this GE2020. Let's speak now to Nick Harper. He's in Washington, D.C. for us. Nick, quite a large population of Singaporeans reside in the United States. What's the turnout been like so far?
Yeah, certainly a very good number live here in the US, more than about 40,000. The US has the third largest population of Singaporeans overseas after Australia and Malaysia. And here in DC, it is one of the big hubs where people can come along and vote. It's been open since about 8 a.m. this morning. It's now 10 a.m., so we're a couple of hours into what will be a 12-hour voting day. Polls in DC shutting at midnight. We've seen a steady stream here, as Ollie was speaking about in London. A good number of people, you can probably see a couple there behind me, have been turning up over the last hour. The expectation is that after the workday ends, there will perhaps be something of a flood after that sort of 5 p.m. type of time, heading into early evening. But the people we've been speaking to have certainly been very excited to come down here, feeling that they need to come and cast their vote. One family that we spoke to got up at 3 a.m. this morning. They were first in line and definitely wanted to be able to cast their vote. Let's listen to what they had to say.
It's a very, very important responsibility for citizens to cast a vote. And not only that, we are actually casting the vote for the next generation, especially for my son's generation.
The pandemic was one of the main concerns I have, but also I think the future leadership of the country is very important.
Nick, how have COVID-19 restrictions affected voters, or has it affected voters in any way?
Well, here in the US, we've got 3 locations where voters can go to: New York, DC and San Francisco. The expectation is that we're likely this time round to see less people turning up, not so much because of travel restrictions, but more that they're simply unwilling to go to those places. San Francisco isn't a hotspot, but it's in the state of California that has currently seen a very large surge in numbers. There is some difficulty to get to those places. People could jump on planes, but they might not want to. As for New York, that of course has been one of the hotspots, and at the moment there is a 2-week quarantine in place for anyone entering the state of New York who's coming from a state that has high numbers. So about half of the US states are included on that list for New York. As for the restrictions here at the embassy, as well as the clearly marked out 2-meter spacing on the pavement, people who turn up to cast their vote, they'll have to have a temperature check before they go in. They'll then have to wear a mask and gloves inside, and we're being told that the polling area is being regularly cleaned. So everyone here at the embassy is certainly taking those precautions, but there is that worry that we might simply just see less people because they're concerned about going to the 3 hubs in the US to cast their vote.
Nick, thank you very much for that update from Washington, D.C. Nick Harper there.